It's really good to be here today with you. The topic I've chosen to speak about is defeating dehumanisation, and those very important big words in blue, that you matter. And soon you'll find out what this is, how this is connected to an Anglo-Polish event. So firstly, I just want to thank Adam and Kate for inviting me to come and speak today. My name's Peter Bellingham. I'm a Christian minister here in Shrewsbury, and my wife Joy is here with me today. You want to raise your hand? She's an artist. We have 3 children, Josh, Tom, and Amy. Amy's here as well today, just in the corner. We lived in Honduras in Central America for 8 years. We worked with an aid organisation over there, bringing medical care to the poor, and we started a church over there. Honduras is extremely poor, extremely violent, but the Honduran people are incredibly generous, spirited, and very brave. And there's so much you can learn from other cultures, especially when you live in them. And we certainly learnt a lot in our 8 years living in Honduras. In 2009, we returned to England, and since then we've worked with The Well, which is a church based in the Square here in Shrewsbury. And we work to bring the hope of Jesus Christ into lives and communities and hopefully the nation. So this is an event celebrating Anglo-Polish relations. Why am I speaking here today, and why have I chosen this particular topic? Well, for 4 reasons. The first one is biology. I'm Anglo-Polish. My mother is Polish and my father is English. Second reason is history. British and Poles, as we've seen and we all know, have fought together side by side against evil. The next reason is morality. There's still a fight against evil that we all have a part to play in. And then finally, spirituality. Spirituality, there is help available for the fight that we all have a part to play in. So I'm just going to go back and look at those reasons one by one. Firstly, biology. This is my father, Arnold Derek Workman. He was born in 1912 to British parents. And this is my mother, Elizabeth Mary Leese, who was born in 1943 to Polish parents. History. British and Poles have come together to fight evil. And particularly, British and Poles have fought together against the evil of dehumanisation. What is dehumanisation? The process of depriving a person or a group of positive human qualities. So taking away from people a sense of worth, a sense of dignity, and doing that deliberately. Dehumanisation effectively says, you are nothing. So I'm going to use you, I'm going to abuse you, I'm going to destroy you as I please. In other words, you don't matter. That's dehumanisation, that's what's at the heart of it. And this is what Britain and Poland came together to fight in the Second World War. But of course we've seen this attitude throughout history. From the first murder when Cain killed his brother Abel, right through to the horrific genocides of recent years. And of course it was so obvious in Nazism. The dehumanizing evil of Nazism threatened to conquer all of Europe, and indeed the whole world. And it had to be fought against. Unlike what a senior politician told me back in the mid-90s, senior British politician, who told me, sat in his comfortable office, that we should have left the Nazis alone, because if we had, it would have all just worn itself out. Not true. Evil has to be confronted and defeated. And the British and the Poles came together to fight it and ultimately defeated it. Now, I imagine your family were involved in this struggle in some way, so were mine. My British father served as a radio operator in the RAF. My Polish grandmother's family was Jewish. My great-uncle and many other relatives were murdered in the Holocaust. My mother's cousin survived the Majdanek concentration camp, and my Polish grandfather, Stanisław Lis, was a senator in the Polish government prior to the Second World War, and then fought in the Polish army during World War II. He fought in the September campaign in Poland in 1939. He was captured by the Nazis, he escaped, he went to France where he fought in the French campaign until France fell. When France fell, he escaped with his unit to Switzerland, made his way from there to Gibraltar and then to Britain. And he spent the rest of the war training Polish troops in Scotland with the 1st Polish Corps. Of course, there are millions of other examples of how British and Poles came together to defeat Nazism with its dehumanizing evil. With the close of World War II, of course, another dehumanizing evil seized hold of Poland and threatened to destroy it, and also threatened Europe and the world. And that, of course, was Soviet communism. Again, this evil said, you're nothing more than a piece in the machine. You don't matter. We can use you, we can abuse you, we can destroy you. In other words, again, you just don't matter. And this caused untold suffering, not only in Poland, but right across Eastern Europe. It had to be fought against, it had to be defeated. And again, Polish and British, along with many others, came together to combat and ultimately defeat that evil. My grandfather was involved in that struggle as well. After the Second World War, he became the deputy chairman of the Council of National Unity, based in London, which was the Polish government in exile. And he was the secretary of the Federation of Poles in the UK. In 1956, he was instrumental in organising the famous Silent March in London to protest the visit by Khrushchev and Bellingham, protesting the Soviet occupation of Poland. So he spent his life helping Poles living in Britain and working tirelessly for a free Poland until he died in the mid-60s. So that's my family, some of my family background. We all, I know, have a story in the background. Were my family heroes? Only in the same way as the millions of others who played their part in one way or another to defeat the dehumanizing evil of Nazism and of Soviet communism. Factory workers, politicians, soldiers, nurses, school teachers, farmers, writers, professors, homemakers, everyone played their part, and every part was important. I'm grateful for all those who faced and defeated those particular evils. It's because of them that we're even here having a meeting today. It's because of them that many of us exist. I'm grateful this country gave my grandparents a place to come and live, a safe place from which they could fight against that evil. I'm grateful this country gave my mother a safe place to live, to grow up in. And I'm grateful my father was born into this country where the values of human worth and dignity run deep. These are the values that give us wisdom and strength to fight against evil. So that's history. How about morality? We can learn a lot from history, and as has been said this morning, we need to. But there's still a fight to be won against evil, and particularly the evil of dehumanization. At the heart of evil is dehumanization. Again, you're nothing, so you can be used and abused and destroyed, treating people as if they have no worth or dignity, and in the simplest terms, you don't matter. This attitude isn't hard to find, is it? Even in our culture here in Britain. We see it in the way that whole nations operate, right down to how children sometimes treat each other in the playground. It's easy to see dehumanization at work through totalitarian regimes like China, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, Syria, to name a few. But the evil of dehumanization is at work right here in our nations, here in Britain and Europe. Here in Britain, greed and self-indulgence cause millions to suffer day by day through, for example, sex trafficking. through slave labor, or through the drug trade. And many more people suffer from self-dehumanization, the idea that I'm worth nothing. They doubt their own worth, they don't think they matter, and so they get trapped in vicious cycles of self-harm, substance abuse, or even turn to suicide. We must fight against this evil. The evil is as real and as deadly and as dangerous as anything that was faced in the Second World War and its aftermath. And we can fight against this evil. Every one of us has a part to play in that fight every day. How can we do that? Well, number one, we need to remember that we matter and then treat other people like they matter. It might sound simple. I'm sorry if I sound like a primary school teacher when I say that, but it's so fundamental to remember I matter and therefore you matter and I need to treat you and myself that way. We need to consistently show others you matter. Through how we think, through what we say, through what we do, we must treat others as if they matter, because they do. Everyone has worth and dignity simply because they're human. And this is how we fight the evil of dehumanization, and this is how we can win on the battleground of our daily lives. And this is where we come on to spirituality. There's help available for this fight. Now, clearly, you don't need to be Christian to recognize dehumanization and to fight against it. And some of you here today, I'm sure, are not Christians, and you're fighting valiantly against this evil. But to be sure of victory, we need the right resources. We need moral authority. We need wisdom, and we need strength. And I can say that all of these resources are found abundantly in Jesus Christ. Moral authority. Let's look at that first for a few moments. You know, this is a pretty interesting building that we're stood in today, and it was quite a maze to find the room. Quite an interesting design. I'd love to know who the architect was. But it's a good building to look at and to navigate through. I didn't think very much about the foundations when I walked into this building. I doubt if you did. If you had any admiration for the building, I doubt if you were thinking very much about how good the foundations were. But a building is only ever as good as its foundations. And in the same way, an attitude such as every human being has worth, has dignity, should be treated as such, that's a good attitude. It's a right attitude. But what's it founded on? An attitude that says dehumanization is evil, that's a good attitude. But what's it founded on? What's it based on? Where's the moral authority for such a view? In other words, what gives us the right to fight against evil? And this may be saddening for some, but very often as a Christian minister in my conversations with young people today in Shrewsbury, I'm very often faced with the belief and the idea that right and wrong are nothing more than your opinion. And so they'll say things like, well, it was right for the Nazis to do what they did. In their minds it was right, so I can't condemn that. I'll condemn it because for me it would be wrong, but for them, well, they're entitled to their own opinion on what's right and wrong. So the idea of that there's an actual good and an actual evil, no matter what anyone thinks, is disappearing from our culture. So what does give us the right to fight against evil? Well, let's think of it this way for a moment. If God does not exist, then good and evil are just ultimately human opinions, because that's all we've got. What I think is good, you may think is evil, and no one can be really right or wrong about it because it's just down to personal opinion. And this belief makes it harder to fight against evil. But God does exist, and Jesus shows us that in his life, in his death, in his resurrection, and in what he does in people's lives today. So if I accept that God exists, then I'm confident that good and evil are not just human opinions. Good is good, and evil is evil. There's a foundation for that. So I can stand up for what's good, no matter what anyone else says about it. In other words, I can have moral authority for the fight. Similarly, if God does not exist, then let's face it, we're just a collection of atoms arranged in different forms, kind of like that board behind me or the chair that you're sitting on, atoms moving around. That's what we are. We just happen to be a different collocation of atoms. How can I then say that I have more worth or should be entitled to more dignity than a chair or a board? It sounds strange, but think about it. It's logical. So again, there's no God. Human worth, human dignity are just human ideas. We're only worth what other people think we're worth. If you think that I'm worthless, why should you treat me with dignity? It's no coincidence that Nazism and Soviet communism were both firmly based on atheistic principles. But if I accept that God created mankind and that he gave his own son, Jesus, for us all, then I know we're all worth more than words can tell. And I'm confident, therefore, that there is something special about humanity that makes us more than just a different collection of atoms, like a chair or a board. And I'm confident that everyone, therefore, should be treated with great dignity. So, if we accept that God exists and gave his son Jesus for us, then we can have solid ground for our values. We know that good is good and evil is evil, and we know that every person has great worth and dignity. And thus, we have the moral authority to confront evil. Again, you can live in a building, you can admire a building, you can use a building without ever thinking about the foundations. We can confront and fight evil without ever believing in God. And I continually applaud all those that do. But a building does need foundations if it's going to stand and if it's going to prevail. So we can have moral authority through Christ, and there's also supernatural help available. Now, sometimes we just don't know the right thing to do we? I mean, do you always know the right thing to do? I certainly don't. We want to do the best for someone. We want to treat them right, but we don't quite know how at times. We need to be given wisdom. Now, if we accept that God exists and that he loves us, we can ask him for wisdom. And he promises to give it, and he does give it. Sometimes we know the right thing to do, we've got the wisdom, but we just don't seem to be able to make it happen. We can't do it. But if we accept that God exists and that he loves us, we can receive his supernatural power and his strength to help us. Now, partly because of the effects of the war, of growing up during the war, and her background, my mother became a very violent woman, and she abused us with beatings and with words and so forth. Again, my story isn't unique by any means. That was some of the effect of the war on my family. And as a young boy, those same seeds of hate began to grow in my life. There were people I absolutely hated and I wanted to take revenge upon. You wouldn't believe it when you look at that sweet little lad. But it was. That was in there and it was powerful. But thankfully, at the age of 12, I asked the Lord Jesus to come into my life and change me, and he did. From then on, he gave me wisdom and power. He gave me wisdom to know how to love even my enemies, even the ones who carried on beating us and abusing us. And he also gave me the power to forgive. That's important. And the power to love those ones who are still being abusive. I don't mean to pretend that it was all fine. I don't mean to ignore wrongdoing. That's not forgiveness. But I mean to not hold on to that resentment that actually ends up being a cancer that destroys the one who has it. He gave the power to let go and forgive, and then to seek the best for those people. And over a period of many, many years, those people's lives turned around as well through the power of Christ. That was 34 years ago, and he's still giving me wisdom and power to do what I couldn't do on my own every day, and I'm grateful for that. When we turn to God for his help, he helps. During World War II, King George VI knew that we were fighting a great evil, and he knew that the situation was quite desperate. And so he called the whole nation to pray for God's help. And God answered those prayers. In 1940, there were 2 national days of prayer that were held in Britain. The first one was on May the 26th, 1940, when the entire British Army, as we know, was trapped at Dunkirk. Day of prayer called. Millions flocked to churches and places of worship all across Britain. You can research if you like, the thousands of people stood queuing up to get into Westminster Abbey to pray that day for the nation. And 2 events immediately followed that day of prayer. Firstly, a violent storm arose over the Dunkirk region, grounding the Luftwaffe, which had been killing obviously thousands on the beaches. And then secondly, a great calm descended on the Channel, the like of which hadn't been seen in a generation, which allowed hundreds of tiny boats to sail across and rescue 335,000 soldiers, a lot more than the 20 to 30,000 that Churchill thought would be able to be rescued. From then on, the people referred to what happened as the Miracle of Dunkirk. By the time the German army was finally ordered to renew its attack, over 338,000 troops had been snatched from the beaches, including 140,000 French, Belgian, Dutch, and Polish soldiers. And of course, many of them were to return 4 years later to liberate Europe. This is a quote from the Daily Telegraph in June 1940. "Officers of high rank do not hesitate to put down the deliverance of the British Expeditionary Force to the fact of the nation being at prayer on Sunday the 26th of May, 2 days before that great storm in Flanders and the calm that came over the Channel." The second day of prayer in 1940 was on the 8th of September, when the London Blitz began during the Battle of Britain. Tomorrow is the 78th anniversary of the September National Day of Prayer, and I'll be in London with 2,500 other people gathering at Central Hall, Westminster, and spending the day praying for Britain and for Europe and for the world. Help is available for the fight, and we will be asking God for it. And I invite you, wherever you are, to join us tomorrow and ask God for his help for Britain, for Europe, and for the world in confronting the evil that we face. I hope you've enjoyed my talk. I hope you understand why, when Adam and Kate asked me to speak today, I felt that I had good reasons to speak. Initially, I was thinking of giving you a whole lot of information about my family background and so on, but then it struck me, everyone has their family background, and it can be very interesting to learn about one another's. But I thought maybe there was something a bit more helpful that I could bring. So I'd like to just finally pass by those reasons I gave for why I'm speaking one more time. But I want to extend them now beyond the bond between Britain and Poland to the whole world, the whole human race, and back down to you. Firstly, biology. Our biology ultimately brings us all together. We're all part of the human family, are we not? History shows people making great sacrifices to come together in great alliances to defeat evil. There's morality to it. We must still fight against evil. And the evil of dehumanization that says you don't matter needs to be defeated with the truth that you do. And then there is help available in Jesus Christ. He gives a firm foundation for moral authority. He gives strength and wisdom that we need for the fight. And he invites us to ask him for that life-changing help. And I invite you, as I did, all those years ago to ask Jesus into your life to give you strength and wisdom for the fight against evil. You are so precious and so loved, and the world needs you. You matter. So together, let's defeat dehumanization. Thank you.